Welcome. This is Michael Hines from the DCU branch and the executive of IFUT, coming to you from the IFUT Media Centre, such as it is. And we are here actually at it's a very important moment for the union because I'm sure, as everybody knows, public sector pay proposals are on the table, and we are formulating or have formulated our response. And the purpose of this webinar is that you're going to be informed about the entire process, but also about the process of voting. First up is going to be our General Secretary, Frank Jones, who's going to talk to you about the implications of the proposal in a kind of broader sense. Then we're going to go through a few questions that have come in, and Miriam Hamilton is going to help us sort of negotiate those. Then we're going to have our president, Emma Sokol, who is going to talk about, well, how the executive has processed the proposals and what its recommendation is. And then we're going to come back around again to Miriam to talk about the logistics of our vote. And I suppose just even some of the kind of like things that to look out for in case there are problems with the voting process. We're not anticipating any, but just in case. So I think that's it. So we're going to begin with the Honourable Frank Jones, who's going to tell us about all of this good stuff that's been offered to us by government. Isn't that right, Frank?
That's exactly it, Michael. And thank you very much for chairing this webinar. And thanks, Rob, too, for all the IT support in the background to it. I'm Frank Jones, as Michael has said. And this is just the information section, just to give me the opportunity to explain the proposal as it stands. So I have a fairly good insight into the proposal because myself and Miriam are both on the Public Services Committee of Congress. And I sit on the executive committee of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions too. So fairly clued into as to what happened leading up to the arrival of this proposal. In addition to that, and it's worth mentioning that there was 4 negotiators on the side of the public sector unions involved in the process. 2 of them are very, very close and work very, very closely with myself and Miriam in a number of processes and ongoing fora. And the other 2 we are close with. So we've good working relationships with all of them. So the proposal, well, where we are right now, we're out of agreement, which is hardly ideal. The last agreement, Building Momentum, or the extension to Building Momentum, expired on the 31st of December last. And we're currently in this phase of out of agreement, trying to get into agreement, and we have this proposal. It is a full proposal, a full proposed public sector agreement. Doesn't have a name yet, other than the Public Sector Agreement 2024 to 2026. But as I say, it is agreement. It deals with more than just pay. But the fact is that pay is central to it, and pay will be the deciding criteria in the vast majority of cases as to whether we accept this or not. And that has been the way in all of the public sector agreements, which we've had since about 2008, and all of the partnership agreements, which dealt with the public and the private sector prior to that, and they went back to about 1987. So it is pay is the determining factor, but the agreement deals with more than just pay. I'll run through some of the non-pay aspects of the proposal, and particularly the ones that deal or that relate to IFUT. I won't go into any great detail about the ones that don't refer to IFUT, don't have an implication on us, but I would ask that everyone who's here has a look at the Q&A document, the IFUT Q&A document, and the link to this meeting, and indeed have a look at the text of the proposal too before voting. Forgive me, I have referred to what's before us as an agreement and as a proposal. Technically, it's a proposed agreement. It becomes an agreement after a ballot. There's 19 public sector unions affiliated to Congress who are voting on this, and we count the votes on the 25th of March. And if the majority are in favour of the proposal, it then becomes the agreement. I'm not going to report on the engagements that led to the proposal being worded. There was a series of engagements between the Public Services Committee and the negotiators, and indeed between the negotiators and the officials on the government, the employers' side, as you would expect. So just straight into the pay terms of the proposal. And Rob, if you could you put that up on the screen there, just to show what the actual pay terms are. Most people will be fairly familiar with them. I mean, if accepted, this will be a 2.5-year agreement, an agreement of a duration of 2.5 years, starting, as you can see from the slide there, on the 1st of January of this year with an increase of 2.25%. And that will apply, that 2.25% will apply to those who are earning more than €45,000 a year annually. And those who are earning less than €45,000 a year, there's a monetary amount, which you can see there, of €1,125 in the first instance, in the first moiety of the proposal. So if accepted, there will, and I'll give you a little bit more detail on that in a second. If accepted, there will be retrospection under the agreement, because obviously, as I said, it starts on the 1st of January and we're past that date now. The reality is, as you can see, the second phase of the agreement is on the 1st of June of this year. And in reality, it may be June even before payrolls deal with this. So there might be retrospection involving the second element of the proposal too. So, as I said, for those who are working full-time and earning under €45,000 a year, they will receive increases greater than the 9.25% in the course of the 2.5-year agreement. And for those on fairly low pay, when you add up all the monetary increases, it could amount to as much as 17.3% for those on the lower pay. That's how it works. It's not that new to have monetary increases for lower earners in agreements such as this. But in this particular agreement, it's geared very heavily towards lower earners. So part-time workers and those on hourly rates of pay will receive the percentage increases under this agreement. All public sector employees or employees funded through public sector, as all of our public sector members are, will receive all of the increases under the agreements. There is a responsibility on each of us in each of our sections to make sure that we do receive the increases. We have in head office here come across several examples across several different employments, several different sections in recent years, where employers were not applying the increases or employers were applying the increases at the wrong times. So the onus is on individuals to check that they're receiving it, and if they're not receiving the increases, if the proposal becomes an agreement, of course, and if this does happen, please reach out to your branch, let them know, and we'll deal with that. So as you can see on the next phase, as you've seen the increases, next phase, the last phase of the agreement goes into 2026. And the last part of the agreement on the next page says that we're getting 1% increase on the 1st of June 2026, with the agreement to expire on the 30th of June. So there you are there now. General round increase in annualized basic pay, 1%, 1st of June 2026. And then the agreement expires on the 30th of June. They're the increases. We have received confirmation from DEPR that, and I just use the wording that they have here as well, on pensions and pensioners. And Rob, I'm finished with those screens, but if people want to flick through them, great, or if you want to flick through them again, great. We have received assurances from the Public Expenditure Department that current pensions increase policy of maintaining parity between the pay of serving staff and pensions that have been awarded under the pre-existing public service pension scheme will be extended for the duration of the new agreement. So pensioners will receive the increases that apply in the agreement, should this become the agreement. What's new in the proposal is the local bargaining clauses. So in addition to the basic pay increases, there is a local bargaining fund which will be equal to 3% of total cost of pay. This is a new development within public sector agreements. And we did have a sectoral bargaining fund of 1% under the earlier part of Building Momentum, which in IFUT, you might recall, we took as a 1% blanket across the board pay increase for all of our members. This one is a little bit more complex. It hasn't been tested before. We have hopes that it will work and work well for us, but 1% of the 3% can be drawn down on the 1st of September 2025, and that's why that's included in the 10.25% as the total increases under the agreement. So once the agreement is ratified or accepted by our members, if that is the case, the executive and the branches and head office will work together to make sure that we get the full benefit of that 1% for our members. So we'll be consulting with branches on that. That's all the monetary aspects. There is a chapter within the proposal dealing with public services transformation. And it talks about continuing to support the government's key national reform plans. So as we drill down into the section that deals with further and higher ed, we see reference made to the future funding report. I mean, we've been pushing, as you know, in head office here for the full implementation of all the recommendations within that report, and good to see that it's on their agenda too. We'll continue to push. There's also specific mention made of the 2022 higher HEA legislation, and as it refers to governance. Now, one can only assume that you're talking about university governance there, and interestingly, we will have a seminar on that very subject tomorrow afternoon in Dublin. And if you haven't seen an invitation to that yet and are interested in coming, please just email us at admin@ifut.ie, and we will extend an invitation to attend that in-person seminar. As we all expect, and we've come to know, there are industrial peace clauses contained within the proposal, as there is with any pay proposal. The dispute resolution process is slightly less complicated than that under the last pay agreement. There are the same no strike clauses, but however, it does need to be said and repeated that the efforts that we're engaging in head office and wider to combat or to rid ourselves of precarious employment practices, they'll continue as they have done in the last agreement, as they continue right now when we're out of agreement, and should we re-enter into agreement, we'll continue with that too. There is a review clause under the proposal, which hopefully we don't have to visit, but the truth is that under Building Momentum 1, we did, when inflation spiraled, and as members will recall, we re-entered into discussions at that stage and took advantage of the review clause. It's there, it's worded the same as the previous clause, which essentially is along the lines of, this proposal is based on assumptions that we all share, and should those assumptions vary considerably, and both sides will re-engage. Finally, and as I've said already, look, if you could just read the Q&As that we've shared and the text of the proposal, I think that will answer most of the concerns. If you stay, Miriam's going to answer some of the questions that have come in advance of this webinar. And I think I can say, Sinead, that's the proposal. So back to you, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank. Informative as ever. And so indeed, we did get some questions in. I think probably some of them have already been covered in what Frank said. So, but nevertheless, I think we should go through, and people have sent them in precisely. Let's give them a sort of specific answer. And so Miriam's going to help us along with that. Miriam, I had a very simple question from somebody, almost, sort of startling in its simplicity, but probably a useful enough thing to communicate. Someone asked me, do we have to vote in order to get this pay increase?
The individual doesn't have to vote. Everyone would be encouraged to vote, but the result of the IFUT vote will be based on those who voted, and it won't apply down to that individual level. It'll be across all of our membership.
Sure. And another sort of simple question that I think we're almost anticipating was about, when would we get the retrospection, like in terms of, once a vote is passed or whatever, if it's passed.
So Frank has mentioned there that we will bring the IFUT vote once counted to a meeting of the Public Services Committee of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. That's nearly at the end of March. It's a very long voting period to make sure that no union and no member was rushed. So if a decision is made at the end of March across all of the unions, and then the union side inform the employer side, the Department of Public Expenditure Reform and all of the other departments, and then they issue circulars, you can see how it will be a little bit of time before it gets down to the individual payroll department. So we will engage with payroll departments in each of the institutions as soon as we are clearer on the decision of our members, and indeed the wider trade union movement, to make sure that there's no unnecessary delays. But as of right now, today, we can't say what date it will be in people's pay packet, because there's too many unknowns.
I mean, I think it's because it's like, it's not a case of spending it already. It's probably a case of it's spent already.
Yes.
So we'll see. But anyway, we had some more precise inquiries that came in. There was one from somebody who has a contract as a research support officer. and they were concerned about whether or not the increases would apply to them, given that they're on an RSO contract. Is there anything you can do to kind of shed some light on that for me, Mary?
Yeah, they probably have every reason to be concerned, because we've come across people in research positions who did not receive increases, public sector increases in the past, but they should have. So this agreement applies to all employees in the public sector. It will apply to any of our members who are research support officers, postdoc researchers, etc. But we are aware of people who didn't receive it in the past. We may encounter issues if people don't receive it again this time, but where we have become aware of those, we've dealt with them. So we just encourage people to contact us if there's any indication of a problem.
Sure. Just as Frank said, I mean, to take responsibility at branch level and to make sure we're vigilant about what's happening or what's not happening. Yeah. The other thing I think has already been covered, but I'll just, another question that came in, which was about that local bargaining element, I think, and what's going to happen to that 1% or whatever. I think Frank's maybe already answered that, but is there anything you'd like to add to?
I don't think there's anything to add to it at this stage, because it is too unknown. There'll be discussions needed at executive level and in institutions, and only after the vote or the agreement is accepted, if indeed it is accepted by the members. So I think the information that Frank has given is all the information we have right now.
Yeah. I mean, there was another thing, I mean, not least given our, commitment to trying to address precarity. And as we all know, we can see in this deal that some efforts are being made, but, I suppose the message is always going to be from us that it's not enough. But somebody did point out with hourly paid members, what I suppose the fundamental, do the increases apply? And of course they must do, but someone did highlight, I suppose, first the fact that for some people, a 2.25 increase is only going to mean €1.50 an hour by way of an increase, so it's stark, isn't it?
Yeah, the monetary value, especially if you're working a very low number of hours, it's not a huge amount of money at all. The first point I'd say, Michael, and you and I know this, we know this in your own institution, we know this in other institutions, the increases should apply to hourly paid people, but they have not always applied to hourly paid staff in the past.
Yeah.
And again, IFUT has had to deal with that and has dealt with that. So while the information is that it will apply to all hourly paid employees, make sure that it does. And if you didn't receive the increase, bring it to our attention as soon as you can. Frank has gone through the detail of the agreement, and in particular, the provisions in the agreement which have a higher weighting towards low paid earners.
Yeah.
But that's low paid earners based on a salary, a full-time equivalent annualized salary.
Yeah.
And if we were to extrapolate like an hourly rate for many of our members over 35 hours or 37 hours or 39 hours a week, 52 weeks of the year, they wouldn't necessarily fall into that low pay category. So some of the measures that are targeted towards low pay won't target hourly paid workers who earn a very low amount of money but don't have an annualized low salary. What I'd suggest there, though, is whether we're talking about agreement like this or any other agreement, the issues that are facing hourly paid workers go way beyond the rate of pay. Yeah. It's about job certainty and security and predictability. And there's far more elements to that hourly paid piece than just the rate of pay. And some of our members on hourly pay would be aware that we're actively in discussions in certain institutions on fairer employment practices for hourly paid workers, or, decent contracts for hourly paid employees instead of the current arrangements, which we believe to be very uncertain and very unfair. And I would suggest that this agreement this agreement will not stop us from pursuing those discussions and advancing those discussions. The pay elements in this agreement, that's all they are. They're just the pay elements. But the other work that IFUT are doing around precarious employment will continue outside of this.
Yeah. Thank you so much. What an amazing answer. Miriam, I think there was one last question, and I've left it till the end because I wasn't quite clear about it myself, but somebody working in a Department of Adult and Community Education contacted us to ask about whether or not there are any provisions for recognizing the job experiences of immigrant public officers elsewhere. I presume that means working in other countries and stuff, come over here, for different point scales and salaries. And are there any non-economic clauses for increasing diversity and inclusion in the public sector? I'm not sure how it necessarily corresponds to the pay deal or something, but the question came in as part of this. So just if you could shed some light on that, perhaps.
So it's quite similar to the answer on the hourly paid piece, which is that this is a pay agreement and a pay agreement only. And if it's not expressly provided for in the agreement, then it requires separate discussions and possibly parallel discussions. So no, there is no express provision in this agreement for the sort of measures that this person is querying. The question about incremental credit and recognition for prior service in other jurisdictions or in other employments, we know that that's something that new employees and new hires have to grapple with individually and try and negotiate individually all of the time. In certain sectors of the public and civil service, there are formal incremental credit agreements where there's a nice tidy calculation where you know whether you're going to jump 1 point or 2 points depending on the years of service you bring to the role. There's no such tidy formula in higher education, and this agreement doesn't provide for any, and it is down to the local hiring manager and the individual. And of course they'll always receive local branch IFUT support if they need any support in that matter.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Miriam. We're going to head on now and talk to, you're going to be back, so don't run away. Okay. Emma, the term glorious the term glorious leader is overused, but let's have a crack at it. Welcome to the webinar, Emma.
Well, I think you're too kind, but in any case, I just want to spend a few moments going over how the IFUT executive arrived at the recommendation that people will have read. So the executive met at a special meeting shortly after the end of the negotiations towards the end of January, and we had our meeting in early February. And I think it's really important to say up front, as per the circulation that all members have received, that the executive was in unanimous agreement that it should recommend acceptance of the proposals to our members. Okay, so I think that's an important point. But that isn't to say, and this is the next step of it, that the executive was of a mind that it's a fantastic proposal. We considered the details in quite a lot of sort of depth, and it is the view of our collective wisdom, if we can call it that, that it's the most favorable outcome that we could achieve in the current climate. Okay, and maybe to reiterate a couple of points that have been made by others already, it's really important to keep in mind that the agreement that has been proposed covers a very relatively short period of time. It's 30 months. So until the end of June 2026. And another point that we've heard in the questions, but again, just to really re-emphasize, IFUT is very pleased, I think, that there is an emphasis on addressing the needs of those of our members that are on the lower end of our pay scales. Now, I appreciate all the points about the hourly paid, but I think as a sort of broad brush approach, I think that is something that should be mentioned as a good thing. Certainly in our discussion, the executive considered areas of current focus of our union, and especially the chronic issue of precarity that IFUT has been working so hard on in the last while. And this, of course, is driven by the continued under-resourcing of the higher education sector. And this proposal doesn't impose any further restrictions on unions' ability to organise, and I think that's important to keep in mind. So IFUT, of course, will continue to work as hard as it possibly can and use every opportunity and available resource to push to do anything that can be possible to combat precarity in the sector. So those people that are not only facing a pay question, but a more sort of existential precarity question, this isn't to say that that work will stop. In fact, it's argued that we will continue to work as hard as we have been doing and to leverage the excellent report to make further inroads. And of course, the same sentiment applies to other issues that I won't list that may be being considered at the moment. And of course, we can't predict the future. So something else may well arise within the period of the agreement. So that really is a sort of high level summary of the details of the discussion. It wasn't done in 5 minutes, so it was seriously considered. And then maybe moving on to another aspect that the executive considered was the voting mechanism. We're again using electronic voting, which means that for our members, the casting of votes should be much simpler than grappling with post and envelopes and all those other things that we don't do so much anymore. And maybe it's worth saying at this point that IFUT had its first electronic ballot in October 2022. It was to do with the extension of the building momentum proposal. We've heard about that in passing in the discussion so far tonight, and that we achieved a turnout of 37% in that ballot, and that represented more than a 10% increase on the turnout on the previous ballot, which wasn't conducted electronically in January 2021. So I think I'd strongly encourage all members to engage with this opportunity to have your voice heard. Of course, I'll reiterate the IFUT executive's recommendation, which is acceptance of the terms of the proposal. And that, I think, is what I wanted to say. I know that our Deputy General Secretary will give us some more details about the ballot procedures, but I'm going to take the chance to say thank you to everybody who's worked hard in getting us to this thing tonight. So thanks, everybody.
And thank you, Emma. So we are moving into the final phase. We're going to talk about votes, folks, and Miriam is going to talk to us about the actual process, including everything that could possibly go wrong and what could go wrong through the magic of digital media. Look how well this is going. Anyway, Miriam, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Wonderful.
So as Emma has said, we're going to use My Voice again. We used them for the last public sector agreement vote. So it was new to all of us at that stage, and we believe it worked very well. And we've used them in a couple of institutions since then. So we have chosen them again as our professional electronic voting partner. The vote period will open at 12 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. All members, that is members still in employment and members in retirement, will receive an email from My Voice directly. And in the email, you'll follow directions to cast your vote. The email will also contain a link to the FAQ and the full text of the agreement. So it'll all be in one tidy place for you. It could very easily end up in your junk box because we know an awful lot of the institutions have been tightening their security over the last while. So any email that is sent from an external provider to multiple email can go to your junk mail. So we'll ask you to check your junk mail box to make sure that you have indeed received it. If you vote straight away, great. And if you don't, you will receive weekly reminders thereafter, and the reminders cease once you vote. So if the reminders are annoying you, just vote. If you don't receive your ballot paper, you can contact My Voice directly, as they will issue you with an email. Their email is support@myvoice.com, but of course you can contact us on the IFUT admin@ifut.ie email address if you need any assistance whatsoever. As I mentioned earlier, it's a very long ballot period. So the ballots will close at 12 noon on the 21st of March. And then we will count them. Well, My Voice will electronically count them, and we'll bring the votes to the Public Services Committee of Congress a few days thereafter. We're hoping, Michael, that it will be very, very smooth, and any kinks that needed to be worked out have been worked out in previous ballots. But the only thing that can potentially go wrong is that someone doesn't get the email. But My Voice are incredibly efficient at responding to queries where they have been raised, where people haven't got their ballot papers. So just make contact with ourselves or with My Voice as soon as you can to make sure you get your ballot paper. Thank you.
Okay, fabulous. I can't imagine a more comprehensive summary. I think we more or less have covered what we need to cover. I'm hoping that people find that useful. Of course, if people have questions, they can go to their local branch and sort of address things there. Everyone's always available. Ears are open. I won't say go off and vote often. steady on there. But let's get through this process and continue to try and prosper. On that note, I'm going to say thanks to all of our panelists. I don't think I've got to ever say that live on video. Thank you all for a wonderful webinar, and enjoy your Thursday night. Bye-bye.